Hey everyone, it's your brother Max, and welcome to the Loading Bookshelf. Today, we're going to review The Cross of Christ by John Stott. Let's get into it. Who is the author? As I already mentioned, it is John Stott. He was born on April 27th, 1921, and passed away in 2011, dying at the age of 90. He was a preacher, evangelist, author, and a theologian. He served 66 years in All Souls Church. Also, he authored about 50 books. And one interesting fact about John is that he loved bird watching, that he even ended up writing a book called The Birds Are Teachers. Summary: The cross of Christ is divided into four parts: approaching the cross, heart of the cross, achievement of the cross, and living under the cross. Part 1: Approaching the cross. John Stott, in his first chapter, established how the cross was central in the life of Christ, the apostles, in the scriptures, and through all church history. Even when the cross received hatred from the world, Christians did not waver from the message of the cross. Then he moves on to why did Christ die? From the human's eyes perspective, it was Judah who portrayed Christ to the religious rulers, who portrayed Christ to Pilate, and in whom Pilate sent Christ to the soldiers who crucified Jesus. But from the perspective of God, the Father gave up the Son, and the Son willingly gave himself up and died on the cross. Then John looks below the surface of Jesus' last week before his death, the upper room, the Garden of Gethsemane, and when Jesus was hanged on the cross. Part 2: The Heart of the Cross. Approaching the cross, John Stott clearly presented that Christ died on the cross in part 1. Now in part 2, he expounds on that, showing the depth of human sin and the holiness of God. That Christ didn't die on the cross just to satisfy the devil or the law or God's honor and justice, but to satisfy God himself, which he did through his holy love. That God himself took on human flesh and died in our place, as the sacrifice of animals were not eternally sufficient, what Stott calls self-satisfaction by self-substitution. Part 3: Achievement of the Cross. John Stott expounds on what the cross has accomplished. It accomplished the salvation of sinners, the revelation of God, and the conquest of evil. That through the death of Christ, God's anger on sin was appeased, and that he had redeemed sinners, justified sinners, and reconciled sinners to himself. Also, the cross reveals the very glory and characteristics of God in the person of Jesus, such as his perfect justice, love, wisdom, and power. Lastly, that Christ has won victory over all evil, Satan, flesh, world, and death. Part 4: Living under the cross. He moves on how it should affect our lives and our relationships. First, that we enter into a community of celebration with those who have been redeemed and have a restored relationship with God, constantly reminding each other of the victory of the cross through the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper. That we come to a true understanding of ourselves as we are in Jesus Christ, which leads us in a life of service in our family, church, and the world. That through the cross, we can endure sufferings as Christ set us an example. That through sufferings, we grow in holiness. And that God himself didn't just pity our suffering, he himself joined in our sufferings. Quotes: We too sacrifice Jesus to our greed like Judas, to our envy like priests, to our ambition like Pilate. How much of us are kept away from Christ because of the love of money, power, and ambition? Second quote: Thus, the very purpose of his self-giving on the cross was not just to save isolated individuals and so perpetuate their loneliness, but to create a new community whose members would belong to him, love one another, and eagerly serve the world. We are called to a community that loves one another and shows this love to the world. Takeaways. My number one takeaway is that you cannot have Christianity without the cross. Second takeaway is that our relationships should be marked by humility, self-giving, and self-sacrifice. Thirdly, that when we die to ourselves, we truly find our self-identity, which is found in Christ. So why should you read this book? First, you're gonna have a grasp understanding of why Christ had to die on the cross. Second, you'll be able to understand God's holy love. And thirdly, how one should live under the cross. Coming to the end of The Cross of Christ by John Stott, I want to thank you all for watching. See you next time.